We're just going to do a brief intro. It looks like we're live. And Jeremy, I don't know if are you going to be taking attendance?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Will I be?
Taking attendance?
Yes. Let me know when you'd like me to start.
All right. I mean, it's 6:31, so I think let's start. As long as and it looks like we probably have a quorum for the committee.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I had two things on at once. I was hearing you and the recording at the same time. So once again, what was that?
All right, so I think we have a quorum in terms of the committee. So I think we should get started.
Great. Okay. So everyone, good evening. Good seeing you all. I am going to mute everybody now. And committee members, when I call your name, please unmute yourself, acknowledge your name, and then mute yourself again. If you're a member of the board but not a committee member, I'm not going to call your name, but I will write your name down. Let's start with Cindy Vandenbosch.
Present.
Thank you. Sandra Alfonso. Sandra Alfonso. Joan Body.
Here.
Thank you. John DeLuper.
Present.
Thank you. David Estrada. David Estrada. Beverly Kleinman.
Present.
Thank you. Karen Rolnick.
Present.
Thank you. Julio Pena III.
Present.
Thank you. Cindy, roll has been called.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Oh, can you make me co-host also if I'm not yet? I just want a quick screen share just to show the agenda and also add one item.
You should be co-host now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So here is the agenda for today. We're going to start. We're joined by Alexander Liao, who's the Legislative and Budget Director. I hope I pronounced that right, Alexander. Council Member Hanif's office, and we'll be talking about translation and interpretation services. And since our committee thinks a lot about effective communication and how we can facilitate as much inclusion as possible in meetings, we thought that it made sense to host it through the Ability and Access Committee. We also are going to briefly discuss plans for accessibility at future hybrid meetings. This is something the staff's working on, so we'll get an update there, but we can also discuss some practices that potentially could go into the handbook, Karen. And then last but not least, if I'd like to add one, this is just a heads up, but we are going to plan a meeting about what is one of our top priorities, which is getting an accessible restroom in our board meeting location, and inviting in agencies that are connected to that to get an update from them, and hopefully also getting some support from our local elected officials as well on that front. So that is in a nutshell what the plan is for today. And I would like to invite Jeremy, do you want to give an update or shall I pass it to Alexander?
I'll give a very brief update and then I'll pass it to Alexander. I've been discussing the need for translation and interpretation services with many of my colleagues at other community boards. We had the opportunity to informally speak to council members from the Government Operations Division, which included Council Member Hanif, who also has a piece of legislation when it comes to interpretation and translation services. So I've since had a follow-up with my colleague in Board 14 with the council member and Alexander. I'll let him, this meeting was a little more urgent when we originally scheduled it because tomorrow morning was supposed to be the hearing on the legislation. that has been pushed back to next month. Saves me from staying up after this meeting to write testimony for it. So I appreciate that, City Council scheduler. And Alexander can speak about the legislation that they will be considering.
Thanks so much for the intro, Jeremy, and I just really appreciate you all granting me some time to speak with you all, and just the attention that you've been putting on this issue and wanting to make sure that the community board is as accessible to all folks who live here, including those who don't speak English. So just lots of appreciation to you all. I'm Alex Liao. You can go call me Alex. I don't think my mom's the only one who still calls me Alexander. So yeah, I'll just talk about the legislation for a minute, and I'll post it in the chat as well, so folks have the exact language. As Jeremy said, this was supposed to be heard tomorrow morning, but the land use hearing for Innovation Queens rezoning is happening at the same time, and the council realized that hundreds of people were going to be testifying and kind of reallocated some resources to make sure that they were able to handle that level of public testimony. Yeah.
Your sound is just a little muffled.
Oh, okay.
Oh, now it's good.
Much better.
Great. Is this better?
So
Too much?
better, so
Okay,
much
great.
better. And one other thing is I will put the text up on the screen if that's okay with you, so everyone
Absolutely.
can see that. Okay, great.
Sorry about that. I forgot that I was wearing headphones. Okay, so not being heard tomorrow, as Jeremy was saying, rescheduled. I just got word confirmation for Wednesday, November 2nd at 10 a.m. And I'll send over those details. We would love to have the support of CB7. And if individual members would like to testify either in their individual capacity or if the board makes the decision on behalf of the board, it would be greatly appreciated. And I can send over all of the details for how to register to testify in an email after this meeting. So I'll just walk through the legislation a bit, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions from folks. So the bill is Intro 570. It would create an office of translation and interpretation within the mayor's office of immigrant affairs. It is assigned to the Committee on Immigration, and it was introduced by Councilmember Hanif alongside our colleagues, Council members De La Rosa, Marte, Brannon, Narcisse, Brewer, Ung, and Gutierrez. Since then, it has also been sponsored by a number of council members. We are up to 22 member sponsors. So the issue that we're trying to address here is that currently our city has local law 30, which requires documents to be translated into the city's government documents to be translated into the city's 10 most spoken languages, and also for interpretation services to be provided in those languages when needed. In order to meet that mandate, right now, our city is outsourcing most of the language service work to out-of-state contractors who are producing, frankly, subpar work at extremely high costs. And as a result, our mandate under local law 30 isn't being met in a number of instances. And the consequences of that are quite significant. So, during the pandemic, I think the struggles were extremely clear when we were unable to communicate essential and time-sensitive information to immigrant communities regarding things like, the vaccine, safety protocols, and ever-changing policies. And I know from speaking with Jeremy that it's something that the community board has really seen as well, and just it being difficult to be able to even just get meeting notices out in different languages, and then in the meetings themselves, struggling with being able to provide live interpretation. because for both like operational reasons and also cost reasons. So the goal with this bill is to create more in-house language infrastructure so we can better ensure compliance with local authority, improve the quality of services, and also, simultaneously launch a pipeline for high quality city jobs for New Yorkers with language skills and have the cultural competency to be able to communicate with folks in their neighborhoods. Additionally, the arrangement of having folks within this office that are hired to do the translation and interpretation in-house would also be a lot more cost effective for the city. There's the Independent Budget Office has conducted a study that demonstrates this. Essentially, we're spending $20 million a year on language line and other contracted services, and it would be significantly cheaper to employ people within this office. And the last thing that I'll highlight is that just 2 weeks ago, the state launched a parallel Office of Language Access that's tasked with doing the same work for state agencies. So we have an important precedent now on the state level that this is something that can be operationalized, and the state is now beating the city in doing this work, and that we should really be following the lead here and establishing this office. I do want to just add the qualifier that this isn't going to be a silver bullet solution, and I think that there are a lot of different language needs that require different approaches. So we're also simultaneously supporting more community-based work. Like the goal isn't to centralize all language services within this office. We were able to win $5 million this year in the city budget for the establishment of worker-owned language co-ops for languages of low diffusion. So like languages that are more rarely spoken, like outside of the mandated 10. So in the coming year, the city is going to be establishing 3 worker co-ops, one for Asian languages, one for indigenous languages spoken in Latin America, Central and South America, and then one in African languages. So I just bring that up to say that we recognize that this bill isn't going to solve all of our problems. There are a multitude of solutions that need to be solved here. And even with the establishment of this office, it isn't going to stop the practice of contracting out work just because the scope is so big. But that building out an in-house infrastructure is a really important start into really reaching language justice. And I think operationally within the community board, what it would look like is that you have a meeting coming up in a month that's going to say it's for rezoning that would definitely affect the Latino and Chinese communities in the area. You put in the request to the office, they're able to put out the meeting notice in the various languages that are needed. You request interpretation, they're able to provide interpreters that at the cost of this agency, not the community board, and they're able to provide the interpretation in the meeting. So that's my spiel. I would love to hear any initial thoughts or questions that I might be able to answer.
Cindy, could I just say preach on?
Yeah. I mean, we definitely have this need. And so we're really grateful. I am personally really grateful to hear that this has the potential of passing. I have just a really basic question. Maybe it's not a basic question, but as far as services, the interpretation and language and translation services. And as a reminder, interpretation is verbal and translation is written. So could you give some examples? So there's the community board example, which is really important, but this would be available to other city agencies as well to make these requests?
Correct. So say, the Department of Transportation is having a town hall about a project that's being proposed in the area. they would be able to reach, the DOT would be able to reach out to this agency and request in-person translation, in-person interpretation in whichever languages they need. And those interpreters would go in person to this event, or if it's on Zoom, they would do it over Zoom, and then also translate the flyers and notices that would, go out to the community, the advertisements that are on the Link NYC kiosks, etc.
Thank you. I see that we have a question here. Pat, would you like to speak? You can unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. I was curious about American Sign Language. Is that something that would be available as well?
So right now, American Sign Languages isn't in the 10 mandated city languages because it's not one of the 10 most spoken languages in the city as of the most recent census. However, via this bill, the office would be required to assist city agencies with identifying translation and interpretation needs in other than the designated city languages. So ASL would fall into that category, and like it hopefully we'd be able to build out infrastructure for ASL as well, because the need is extremely clear, but it wouldn't fall under the scope of the local law, the currently existing local law 30 around which languages are mandated by law for all materials to be translated into, or interpretation to be provided in.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And I know actually that the mayor's office for people with disabilities, at least the last I knew, they do have ASL interpreters, but for the services, like for city services. And I don't think that applies to community boards, but they do have in-house staff that have helped with interpretation, ASL interpretation. So that might be something also to look into if that wasn't something your office was aware of. Karen?
Hi, so these interpreters, they will be available in evening hours when we have most of our meetings, right?
Yeah, I mean, operationally, it would be how it's run would be up to the mayor's office. And I wouldn't want to make a promise that I can't keep, but yes, the intent of the bill
because
is
if they're only available from 9 to 5, we can't really use
yeah, absolutely. And I think the majority of community events are outside of 9 to 5, so people can attend them. And the intent here is absolutely for people to for the interpreters to be available as
for our meetings,
right?
And I would imagine, there's probably going to be much more demand than there is ability for you to provide translations. So someone's going to have to figure out whether it will be first come, first serve, or need based, or something like that, right?
Yeah. And I'd say that the bill language, just like from us from the legislative perspective, isn't particularly prescriptive. And we're trying to give the Moya, the mayor's office of immigrant affairs, the kind of the operational flexibility they need to stand it up. But all of those are extremely well raised and very much within the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And our collaborators at Moya, they're people who come from community based organizations and the immigrant justice movement, and are very much aligned on the need here.
Is there anyone, and so you're coming to us. Oh, John has a question. And then after John's question, if Alex, you could share what you're looking for a letter of support, and then we can kind of discuss and move that forward. Okay, John. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. So Alexander, you mentioned a lot about the process and setting this up. My question, and you might have said it, but I wasn't sure. The budget, so the funding that is proposed for this would be in next year's budget, or does it come sooner than that? How would that work?
Yeah, so it's a piece of legislation. It's not it's not tied to a budgetary amount. It would the passage of the legislation would, necessitate by law that the office is created, and the city would essentially be obligated to operationalize the office or be subject to suit for violating its own law. In terms of the number, the state committed $2 million to creating their own office when they made the announcement that they're launching their parallel office. So we think that that's like a good place to start. We know that like in total, the city spends $20 million annually on language services. So it could expand significantly more to that the more we reduce our reliance on the contracts and build out our own capacity. An IBO study that was conducted on this said it would cost to get like one language specialist in each of the 10 mandated languages. It would cost about $900,000 and then another $200,000 for supervisory staff for that level of staff. And that includes all of the, the costs associated with personnel. So pensions, healthcare, et cetera. So we'd pass the bill here, and then on kind of the budget side, we'll be in advocacy alongside, our partners in the advocacy space of the CBO space around trying to, get as much money dedicated towards the office in the FY24 budget, which is due the last day of June of 2023 and would start July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024.
Thank you.
One question, and you might not have the answer to this, but the state office that's been created, do you know whether that then serve, like if we had an MTA, a meeting with the MTA, is that where we'd be able to request, or maybe the Department of Education?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know. I don't, the office isn't like, I haven't seen how it's going to work, but I think that for MTA, it makes a lot of sense. I think DOE would fall more under us, even though it's like, it's an entity, it's a creation of the state. It's functionally a city agency. But I can link just the office's website. I don't have a good point of contact there yet, but
yeah, no
reach
worries.
out, because I think that makes a lot of sense and just very practical.
I have one other question, which is that you mentioned the cost. If there are staff that are in-house, and I have to imagine that is much less expensive than if we were to continue the current practice, right, of using interpreters that are contractors. Yes, I'm seeing you now.
Yes, that was the what the study said, and
great.
Great. I can't speak like on the community board level. Like I don't know how much you're paying for live interpretation, but I would imagine, yeah.
So Jeremy, I mean, one thing that one of our challenges is that we haven't historically had, we've wanted to have more interpretation services, and that's been a real challenge because of the cost.
Right.
And so Jeremy, I don't know if you want to speak to that. And also we did list it hasn't passed yet, but in committee last week at the capital and expense budget meeting, we did list interpretation and translation services.
Yeah, folks will have a chance to vote on it at a final time tomorrow night. I believe it was number 2 or 3. I can't remember which when it came to expense budget items.
Yeah, so it's just passed out of committee, and we'll be looking at that tomorrow. But Jeremy, is there anything you want to share on the budgeting like just our experience?
Sure. So the 2 examples horse. The two examples I always give are a couple of meetings that happened in the past couple of years. In October of 2021, we had a meeting at Senior Center on 60th Street about 7th and 8th Avenues. We needed simultaneous translation for both Chinese and Spanish because it was simultaneous and a very long meeting. We needed two in each language. And so for $75 a pop per hour, that ended up being $900, which was about 4% of our entire budget for the whole year for a single meeting. The other meeting I talk about is the meeting we had regarding the 8th Avenue subway station that the MTA asked us to have this meeting because it helped them to get the word out. So I asked them for Chinese translation, and they said, that's on you. They are a $50 billion agency. We are a $250,000 agency. One of my colleagues did the math. Community board budgets have gone up about 40% in the past 40 years. We have less than half the staff we had back then.
Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing that context. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question? Otherwise, Alex, what can we do? What can we do for you?
Yeah, I think that we're at a place now where the bill has like a good amount of support within the council. We're continuing to build that out. I'm working to try to wrangle more sponsors. We've discussed the bill with Moya, and we're a little bit worried about administration pushing back against this bill due to associated costs, of which we just discussed. So really key to our strategy to getting this bill passed is getting testimony in support at the hearing that's going to happen on the 2nd. So we would love to have someone on behalf of the community board join and testify in support in that capacity. I
was planning it, and I was working with my colleague at board 14 because we have different kinds of needs, but we both have we both don't have the budget to meet those needs, translation and interpretation services. So we thought testifying together about why it shouldn't just be a budget allocation, but a service that's provided showing the different needs of different small agencies. We thought that would be useful.
I completely agree. And we can coordinate offline, but I'll try to get the two of you on the same panel for testimony. And then I'll also say that there's power in numbers, and like a lot of this time what like admin ends up doing is just like tallying how many people are in support. So if more than one person would like to testify, like it would just be great if however many members are able to join and testify in support. It would be immensely helpful to us.
Thank you. Karen has a question.
I missed the time and date and place for that meeting.
Yes. I will send it over email as well. So, but it is Wednesday, November 2nd at 10 a.m. It is occurring in the committee room of City Hall, and you can testify either live in person there or virtually.
And will there be language interpretation at the meeting?
There will be. It's a great question, and it'd be really messed up. The answer was no. I can send over all of the info to request interpretation. And as long as if you make the request 72 hours in advance, we can guarantee live in-person interpretation.
Thank you.
And I just want to ask Jeremy in terms of procedure. Oh, it appears that we have a question from one of our audience, Melissa Del Valle Ortiz. And I'm happy to honor that, and then we'll kind of discuss and sort of finalize our response to this. So can we allow Melissa to? Oh,
Melissa, you could unmute. I thought you were handling that. Sorry, Cynthia.
oh, that's okay.
Someone else.
So actually, I would just like to know, this is Melissa Ortiz from the Office of Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez. And I just want to know, there are two developments that I'm aware of. I believe one is ironically not in our community, but one is on 23rd Street between 6th and 5th, I believe. It's federally subsidized housing for part of hearing and blind. And then there's another high school here in Brooklyn, DeSalle's for the deaf. And I wanted to know, what are you doing to also incorporate youth and seniors specifically to engage them in this conversation?
Melissa, is that question for Councilmember Hanif's office? It's for Alex or for the committee? Or both?
Apologies. It's for Alex for the testimony.
Oh, that is, I'm not exactly sure if I'm familiar with the issue that you're raising on, you said 23rd Street?
I believe it's federally subsidized. I know that it's federally subsidized housing. I believe it's for blind and deaf residents in Manhattan.
Oh, okay. Let's connect offline. I would love a little bit more information about, just like a little bit more context, because we'd love to, make this as inclusive as possible and
Sure.
loop folks in. I'm going to leave my email and phone number in the chat, and let's
Cindy will
let's talk.
connect us.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. We appreciate it, as always. So, as Jeremy, just in terms of protocol, should we, do we need a motion of any kind for this or no?
You don't need one, but you might like one. If you want to support the legislation, you can make a motion. And if the committee supports it, you can put it before the full board tomorrow for a vote. I think that would be something, if it passes, that I would put in my testimony.
Okay, great. So, and it's okay if I propose the motion, or Karen, do you want to propose the motion since you're unmuted? Okay, I see your hand raised.
I move that Community Board 7 support the new law for interpretation services and translation services funding.
Intro 570.
Oh, thank you. I move that Community Board 7 support Intro 570.
Okay, is there a second?
Joan seconds the motion.
Joan seconds. Okay, and is there any discussion on the motion?
Nope.
And is anyone opposed to unanimous consent?
Sorry, I was trying to raise my hand.
Yes.
I like to, sorry, discussion. I was bike riding, so I just got off the bike, and I did wanted to discuss before we did vote on it. Apologies, and now I'm catching my breath. I'm very excited about this. I think, we have been talking about interpretation for a really long time. I think it's something that we have really been focusing on, and I'm excited about this. One thing that I would like to see in our support of this legislation is really some kind of funding behind it. I'm excited about this, but I'm also concerned that, we have this really great piece of legislation, but we're not going to have the power or funds to implement it. And that's something that, you know, we as a community board with our limited funding are just not going to be able to deliver, particularly in our district. So I would love if our support is also comes with like actual funding behind it, whether that be through funding directly to community boards or funding through a central office, through the Civic Engagement Commission, some organization or some city agency that's responsible for handling language services for city agencies, something, because I'm just a little worried that we'll be required to do something, but we're not going to have the funding to implement it.
Julio, are you like requesting then like an amendment to this, or are you like
do you have a language amendment, an amendment to the language of the motion?
Yes, I guess that's what I'm saying.
So
Language just saying if there would be funding to support language interpretation.
So what is the name of the law again, Jeremy?
So if I may, Karen, your wording would work, and then Julio would add on, and we additionally call on the mayor and the city council to provide funding for this program.
I accept the friendly amendment.
Julio, was my language okay?
That language was perfect.
Thank you.
All right. So now with the friendly amendment, so it's to support this bill for language and interpretation services, with the assurance that there will be funding from the mayor's office and another office that I can't remember. Jeremy, what's the other office?
So we said the mayor and the city council will negotiate the budget.
Okay, great. And so I'd like to try to pass this. Is there any more discussion? No. Okay. So I'd like to try to pass this through unanimous consent. Is anyone opposed? Seeing none opposed, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Yes.
Cindy, I know this won't be popular tomorrow night, but perhaps this would be a good one to request a roll call vote instead of unanimous consent tomorrow, so we could show the numbers behind this at our board.
Okay. Yes, Karen.
And also when you bring it up, I'm sure you would do this anyway, but we could ask for a call for volunteers to testify.
Thank you. Yes, let's do that. So Alex, thank you so much. Is there anything else before we sort of wrap up this portion of the agenda?
Nothing from my end. Yeah, just let me know how the vote goes tomorrow, and so grateful for the support of the committee, and hope that we get the full board support tomorrow.
I mean, it's just to think that we would be able to engage and provide this service would make, community, it would enable us to really engage many more members of the community more effectively. It's just so important for city government. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Am I helpful at all in any of the rest of the agenda, or should I head here?
So there is one item, and I'm going to use the privilege of chairing the meeting to go out of order since you're here. And that item has to do with accessible restrooms at CB7. So this has been, again, Jeremy, I'm going to ask, it's been technically funded since 2016?
Since fiscal 2014, there's almost $500,000 sitting in the capital budget, waiting to be spent on making our bathrooms accessible. And here Here we forgive this sit 10 years later, waiting on our bathrooms.
Yes, so there's an issue here where people who use wheelchairs can come to meetings, they can enter the building, but they can't go to the bathroom if they're at a meeting. And so, you know, and then there's just been no movement. Jeremy, can you tell us which agencies are associated with this project?
DCAS owns the building, the NYPD manages the building.
So we are considering, and I guess the reason we're asking you to stay on is that we would appreciate your support and help in moving this forward. We're also going to be reaching out to Councilmember Aviles' office as well. But we're also considering putting a meeting on the calendar and inviting DCAS and NYPD to provide us with a status update. And we would love for you to attend if we are able to schedule that meeting.
Great. Yeah, we would love to be as supportive as we can. If, you know, just can commit to attending at a meeting, either myself or someone else from the team. You know, Councilmember Hanif has a disability and has really made accessibility a core part of what we're trying to do here. So that's upsetting to hear, especially that, you know, you did the hard part and got the budget allocation. So, you know, if there are other steps that would be helpful for us to take, if it's like sending a formal letter from Shahana to DCAS NYPD, you know, we'd be happy to do that. If you think back channeling is more helpful and it's just like sending an email, like asking for a status update request, happy to do that as well.
Yes, please. I think that the more that we're all asking about what the status is on that, that'll be helpful. And we also intend to reach out to them for a status update for a committee meeting as well.
Cool. Yeah, if you want to just send me the details via email, so I'm just making sure I'm getting them right. I'll put it into letter format. Might be helpful for us to do jointly with Councilmember Aviles. And I can reach out to Christina from their team and try to get something done jointly.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, we'll do that. So I think that just the other item on our agenda is about hybrid meetings, and I don't think we need you to stay unless there's anybody that has any other questions for Alex at this time. No? Okay, thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for granting me the time. It's a pleasure. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Yeah. So the last item, so I'm going to ask if there's also any other comments on the strategy of inviting DCAS and NYPD to come give a status update. Does anybody have any questions or comments or, anything related to that before we move to the next item on the agenda? Okay, so we're going to move that forward and hopefully get a meeting sooner rather than later with Jeremy and the board staff's help. So the last item on the agenda has to do with hybrid meetings. And Karen and many board members, several board members have been hard at work creating the handbook, which I know most people saw in draft form in anticipation of tomorrow's meeting and just finalizing that project. But also in light of the last meeting that we had where it wasn't meant to be hybrid, but somehow it morphed into that. And we had kind of an unofficial test run. Now there's actually going to be a test run. And so Jeremy is going to be doing a test run with other board staff later this week. And Jeremy, if you'd like for a couple of volunteers for that, we can do that here, or you can announce a time at tomorrow's meeting if that's the strategy you'd like to take.
We can put it in everybody's head. It'll likely be Friday morning, but I want to speak to Maria and Natasha before we set the actual schedule. We just want a couple of people who might be able to join us for 5 or 10 minutes. just so we could test out the audio, so we could test out your audio and our cameras as well, and make sure we know how the controls work in a hybrid meeting. We haven't done one like that. I believe we had Metro Sound Pros come in about a month ago. We did some tests with them. They fixed the audio problem that we were having for that first meeting. So I believe we're ready now. But part of being ready is also getting our staff used to using this in a new fashion. So tomorrow night, excuse me, during my report, we will I'll make the announcement of the timing, and I'll ask for a couple of volunteers. Excuse me, I'm doing double duty here.
So like, thank you, Jeremy. Like, it really, that sound was the biggest challenge. And there was something that occurred to me just being there that I was excited about, which relates to accessibility, is the fact that there are now 2 TV screens in the room where you can see the Zoom broadcast. For those of you that weren't in the room, if you are physically in the room, you can see what's on Zoom. And so that means you can see captions. So we can even make the size of the captions even bigger so that people that are sitting in the room will be able to see those. So there's certain like settings and things like that that I think we can, tweak and practice together on Friday. And I'm happy to hear that Metro Sound Pro. So I just so we're all fully informed, this here, it's like the hardware situation is that you've got a high definition camera in the back of the room that is controlled with a remote control, usually by Jeremy. And then there's 2 TV screens now that are at the front of the room, large screens. And those, again, we'll be able to display captions. There's a sound system that's physically in the room. So there's a hearing loop beneath the carpet. So if someone who comes in person is sitting in the room and they have a cochlear implant or a hearing aid and it has a telecoil in it, which most do, they can just turn that on and hear direct sound from whoever's speaking into the microphone. But that sound is also now, as per Jeremy, going to connect to the Zoom, which is what we want to test out on and make sure works on Friday. In which case, then you have accessibility kind of in both places, which is amazing. And then from a software standpoint, we have the automated closed captions, which we can make bigger. You have communication mechanisms, the chat box and or the Q&A. And then software wise, we're also streaming out to YouTube. There's a lot of different steps that are involved, which I just wanted to highlight here so people appreciate everything that the staff is juggling when they're sort of doing a meeting, from the Zoom account, activating the closed captions, connecting and testing sound, live streaming to YouTube, managing questions and voting and sharing the screen. And so I think that's where, in terms of practices, there are things that we all can do to make the meetings more accessible when you have some people in the room and some people tuning in from home. And some of these we've talked about in meetings and some we have not. But I'm going to walk through these ideas. And then if anyone else has other ideas to add to the mix, for us to think about how do we make this where you have half the people in one place and half in another, and ensure that we're together in a way in our communication. So is the accessibility, just sort of a note about how people can engage, whether they're tuning in online or in person, with the meeting announcement, making sure people on Zoom name themselves if they can correctly, because if they come up on the big screen, it's like having a name tag. And chat box etiquette, printing out handouts, accessible fonts and font sizes, and also just in the boardroom, trying to describe what's happening so that people at home, they might not catch things. So we might have to verbalize things we might not otherwise. And that includes like when we speak, whether we're online or at home. I think it would be helpful if we said, this is so-and-so, so that people know who's speaking. So, because it can be disorienting if you're like in two different places. And the other thing that sort of occurred to me was that ASL interpretation could be remote because it's a visual. You could have an ASL interpreter that's actually pinned to the screen, and that might also reduce cost for contracting an ASL interpreter if one should be requested. Language interpretation isn't the same because it would be simultaneous. You wouldn't be able to use Zoom necessarily for that same. I'm not sure how we would do language interpretation for hybrid meetings.
Cindy, for
Yeah.
American Sign Language, I was thinking perhaps that's something we can reach out to a school or schools and find students who might want or need to put in certain numbers of hours or want to practice perhaps on large meetings, or maybe that's something we could go that route until hopefully the city provides a service.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when people request. The issue sometimes with the like students is that it's the same issue as if you have like a language interpreter who isn't like fully equipped to like actually provide, foster, and support effective communication. So if we're going to do it, I feel like we should do it right, and we should just do it upon request. But having the captions is a big step, and hopefully we can invite MOPD and discuss this issue with them as well, and maybe they can think about like the ASL in community board meetings. Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know very much about this. I've never known a deaf person, so I just want to know what advantage is there to American Sign Language if you've got captions?
Because American Sign Language, so if they want to communicate, it's
for them to be able to speak in their sign language.
So it has to do with that.
Someone would have to speak it.
And it also has to do with literacy. So we can't assume that everyone whose native language is ASL has like high literacy skills or like reading skills. So it's more accessible. Their native language is American Sign Language, and American Sign Language is not a one-to-one with English. It's a mix of different. Even the grammar is different. So it is its own kind of language, and so if we can provide that service, it provides the effective communication. If that's something that someone requests.
You also made a very good point, though, that it helps them. Like captions are for listening. American Sign Language is also for speaking.
And the captions are amazing, and I'm glad we're going to have them, but it shouldn't replace if someone requests to have American Sign Language. We need to figure out a solution for doing that. Joan.
Jeremy, put me down as to help you Friday and any other time, because with my beautiful hearing, I would be a good guinea pig.
Are you challenging me, Joan?
Yes. So
Challenge
anytime,
accepted.
and anytime, even if it's more than 5-10 minutes, I'll make time for you.
Are there any other I mean, one of the things about language interpretation, so American Sign Language is visual, so you could technically have an interpreter on screen who's interpreting. But for language translation, I was trying to like wrap my brain around this, where you could have an interpreter who is on Zoom, and then the people on Zoom would hear the language interpretation, but then the people in the room, I don't think would hear it. Or you could have the people in the room with their portable assistive listening devices that we have to like a language that's in their channel. But then how do you connect that sound to the people that are at home? And so that to me is like something that we're going to need to, yeah, Karen.
Yeah, in my research for the Beloved Handbook, I found out that Zoom has breakout rooms that are often used for that purpose.
So there is like a translation mechanism in Zoom, but I guess the question is, how would someone who's sitting in the boardroom, usually they use like portable devices, they'd need to be then connected to their phone, tuned into Zoom, listening to the channel that has simultaneous translation, unless we just did simultaneous translation throughout the entire meeting where you had English and then another language, English and another language in real time, the whole time.
We have done that. That's how we did the meeting regarding 7th and 8th Avenues. It was difficult, but it was possible. We had the interpreters in the room and they were interpreting essentially Chinese to English. But there was also a separate channel on Zoom that people could tune into whatever language they chose to listen to. We also had Spanish translation at that meeting.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Jeremy. Joan, and then John.
This is not to do with interpretation. So if John has an interpretation question, maybe you want to take him first?
Sure. John, is yours interpretation related?
It's sort of. So I can wait till after Joan goes. That's totally fine.
Everyone's so polite. Joan, all right, go for it.
The other problem that I think we have to address, if it wasn't already, when at the meeting, the hybrid meeting that we had, people in the audience that were asking questions or were speaking, we couldn't hear them at all. So
yes. So we need everyone to use the microphone. We have to get back to going up to the gooseneck. We're going to have microphones. And as long as the
We
microphone
have
is
two portable microphones now, so people don't have to come to the front.
oh, that's
At
amazing.
meetings, we will need volunteers, board members, hopefully, stationed at 2 different points in the room to handle the microphones, but we have portables.
That's amazing. So then, Joan, that kind of helps us solve it, because it was really hard to get everybody to, that's not even as accessible to make everybody get up and speak. So we'll pass around, we'll have a facilitator pass around microphones, and that's connected to the sound system. And the sound system, hopefully, fingers crossed, will work this Friday and in future meetings. But thank you. That's really important. And just getting people to use the mic and just reminding them and making sure we all advocate for that. John.
Okay, so continuing on this theme about the interpretation and the equipment. So the way that happened with the 8th Avenue one, they were in the same room. Is that right? Because I feel like maybe it was an Industry City one that the board ended up using 2 rooms, maybe one that was in the library and one that was the boardroom.
So interpretation was handled in different ways. That was not on Zoom. That's back when we were on Facebook. We had people in the room speaking into a microphone, other people with headsets listening in the language they were interpreting into.
So that's where, John, we have portable assistive listening devices that you can set the channel. And so we can do that, but the question is, how do we?
Who's going to speak into the microphone?
It's about who's in the microphone, and also like how do we connect that to people that are on Zoom who may have interpretation needs? And Zoom has its own interpretation needs, but how do we connect that to people who are sitting in the room? And so that's like, we're probably not going to solve that on this call, but we should identify that as a need and see what I don't know how city council and other agencies are handling this. So maybe it would be good to ask.
We wouldn't even have the other room like the other time, which would kind of prevent crosstalk if you have people on different channels and also talking at the same time. So yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah. Great. So thank you all, thoughtful. So that's a puzzle we need to solve. And I'm sure other community boards are thinking about this too, hopefully. But without further ado, I think unless there are any other issues that anyone would like to raise, we will plan on calendaring another meeting within the next month with DCAS and NYPD. If you would like to include anything else on that agenda or future meeting, please feel free to reach out to Jeremy. And if everybody's okay with this, what do I need to do? Call the meeting, adjourn the meeting? I motion to adjourn the meeting. Okay.
I second.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jeremy.